everyone. As we continue our journey through the first book of the Bible, the book of Genesis. We have come to a very pivotal story in the life of the Israeli people, the story of Joseph. Catch up here where we're at. We are at Genesis 39, I believe. And Joseph had been sold into slavery and has been taken away by some Bedouin businessmen to the land of Egypt. When in Egypt, he finds himself in the house of a great official, Potiphar. And this is one of these stories where within the Christian tradition, we should pay some keen attention. And the reason being is because within our tradition, there's a notion of a series of descents. Anytime you see someone descending into deeper and deeper trouble, you should pay some keen attention because there's a bit of an allusion to the life of Christ that can be found there. Think of Joseph going down into the belly of the whale, which goes down into the sea, and then down into Nineveh, and how that story not only speaks. Did I say Joseph?
Noah.
Noah goes through all of these descents, and that story not only speaks of Noah dealing with his own recalcitrance and things of that nature, but just how far God is willing to go to reach out for his people. You have a story like this one where Joseph goes down into the well, gets sent down into slavery, gets sent down into Egypt. And this also gives us some knowledge of the character of how God feels about us and how far God is willing to go. So that's some context for us in our reading. But remember, we're reading all of this through what I'm framing as our hermeneutic framework. We're looking at the author. Bible and tradition holds that the author is Moses. The text itself and what the text has to say, but the text is to be read in context of the intended reader. The intended reader were the Hebrew people. This is the history of how the faith began. And the intention of giving this history is to show why these people should be set apart. What makes us special, essentially, is what's in the juice there. So we're reading for in our modern sensibility with a twofold idea there that we can hold in tension. So let's get into it. Genesis 39. I'll read out first, starting from verse 1. Now Joseph was taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man. He was in the house of his Egyptian master. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to prosper in his hands. So Joseph found favor in his sight and attended him overseer of his house, and put him in charge of all that he had. From the time that he made him overseer of his house and over all that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. The blessing of the Lord was on all that he had, in the house and in the field. So he left all that he had in Joseph's charge, and with him there, he had no concern for anything but the food that he ate. Now Joseph was handsome and good looking. And after a time, his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, "Lie with me." But he refused and said to his master's wife, "Look with me here. My master has no concern about anything in the house, and he has put everything that he has in my hand. He is not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept back anything from me except yourself, because you are his wife. How then could I do this great wickedness and sin against God? And although she spoke to Joseph day after day, he would not consent to lie beside her or to be with her. One day, however, when he went into the house to do his work, and while no one else was in the house, she caught hold of his garment, saying, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand and fled and ran outside. When she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and then fled outside, she called out to the members of her household and said to them, "See, my husband has brought among us a Hebrew to insult us. He came in to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. When he heard me raise my voice and cry out, he left his garment beside me and fled outside." Then she kept his garment by her until his master came home. And she told him the story, saying, "The Hebrew servant whom you brought to us came in to insult me. But as soon as I raised my voice and cried out, he left his garment beside me and fled outside." When his master heard the words that his wife spoke to him, saying, "This is the way your servant treated me," he became enraged. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. He remained there in prison. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love. He gave him favor in the sight of the chief jailer. The chief jailer committed to Joseph's care all the prisoners who were in the prison and whatever was done there. He was the one who did it. The chief jailer paid no heed to anything that was in Joseph's care because the Lord was with him. And whatever he did, the Lord made it prosper. Good point, stop. So Joseph is getting into it. He's been sold into slavery, and then even while in slavery, he got thrown into jail. It's not fair at all. But one thing that is true, he must have been one hell of a businessman. Because no matter where he went, like people certainly, he was E.F. Hutton of his day. When he spoke, people listened. That definitely was true. Anything else anyone see in there?
But don't you think it was also through God's guidance?
Well, certainly.
Because
Yeah.
God was always on Joseph's side, right?
Certainly.
Yeah.
Certainly.
So he favored. I it spoke a lot for Joseph's success, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Most definitely.
Which is an example for us in a small way or a large way or a big way.
We have a responsibility to pay attention to
Yeah.
what God has in mind for us,
Yeah.
and therein lies the rub.
Do we ever listen?
Scripture doesn't say that God was on Joseph's side because he was perfect,
No.
or anything other than Joseph had faith and God affirmed that faith by being sure that he had the skills that he needed to survive. Let's face it.
Yeah.
If he did not have a useful skill to bring to the table, it's very sure that this world would obviously consume him. But those skills and those gifts gave him room to not be totally lost in the craziness
He always
of
found
what
his
life
way.
was going on. Yeah. Anybody out there, you guys have any thoughts online? All right, we should continue. Let's see here, Genesis 40. Shelley, if you wouldn't mind, let's read out from verse 1 of chapter 40 until get a good portion here. Let's at least get the dream. From verse 1 until the end of 19. It'll be a good portion, but we should get through a bit of this dream here.
Okay. Sometime after this, the cupbearer of the king of Egypt and his baker offended their lord, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his two officers, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. and he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard charged Joseph with them, and he waited on them, and they continued for some time in custody. One night they both dreamed, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in the prison, each his own dream, and each dream with its own meaning. When Joseph came to them in the morning, he saw that they were troubled. So he asked Pharaoh's officers who were with him in custody in his master's house, "Why are your faces downcast today?" They said to him, "We have had dreams, and there is no one to interpret them." And Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Please tell them to me." So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph and said to him, "In my dream there was a vine before me, and on the vine there were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, its blossoms came out and the clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand." Then Joseph said to him, "This is its interpretation. The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office, and you shall place Pharaoh's cup in his hand just as you used to do when you were his cupbearer. But remember me when it is well with you. Please do me the kindness to make mention of me to Pharaoh, and so get me out of this place. For in fact, I was stolen out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also I have done nothing that they should have put me into the dungeon." When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was favorable, he said to Joseph, "I also had a dream. There were 3 cake baskets on my head, and in the uppermost basket were all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh. But the birds were eating it out of the basket on my head." And Joseph answered, "This is the interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and hang you on a pole, and the birds will eat the flesh from you."
Oh, that's nice.
Shelley, can we read to the end of the chapter? There's only a little more here.
On the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, he made a feast for all his servants and lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his servants. He restored the chief cupbearer to his cupbearing, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. But the chief baker he hanged, just as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him.
Not nice.
Well, there you go.
Where's the justice?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's coming. But we see in Joseph, a man whose word is to be respected, whose counsel is trusted, and moreover, who is given increasing power, even within, the circle of people who find themselves in a desperate situation. He's still a leader, and he's still someone whose voice is sought after. And he delivers good and bad news. It's unvarnished, right? But yeah, there you have it.
Well, it's interesting though that the one fellow did not remember him,
Yeah,
which is, he didn't
I think
keep
you
his side of the
remember that.
bargain.
yeah,
Yeah,
which is
But-
natural to humanity.
yes, but it's kind of interesting that Joseph he was so confident within himself, he was able to ask that favor. He
Mhm.
didn't do it just out of the goodness of his heart, in a sense.
Yeah, yeah. When in this situation, there's only one person who really truly has the power to free him. Well, possibly two. Potiphar could find reason to do so, but
Or the Pharaoh.
or the Pharaoh, right? And so he's going straight to the boss.
It's interesting that there's no attempt to justify why one was hanged and the other was forgiven.
Yeah, good point.
Especially he forgot him.
Yeah.
I guess that wasn't the intent of the
Well,
story.
I mean, this is one of those situations out where it definitely shows that you have not been to prison. Because in such a place, the word goes around, everybody in prison is innocent, right?
Yeah,
But among the prisoners, they know who's innocent and they know who's not.
yeah.
And so, I'm pretty sure when, the cupbearer got thrown in there along with the cake baker, because the cake baker was up to something. And word got around the prison pretty quick, who he was and what his character was,
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
But obviously that issue was not a critical issue to the story.
Oh, no, yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
Right.
Right.
Exactly. But I could see a world
A
in
good
which it was
aside.
easy for Joseph to figure out what those dreams meant in that, I've, having done a lot of prison ministry, I've never been in a place more gossipy in this world. I mean, you're gonna get the entire story of everybody in there from other people. And all of the angles. And so I'm pretty sure, he knew what those guys were up to, what was coming and what was actually hanging over them.
Yeah.
And that informed his interpretation. That's my take on all of that. Let's see. Genesis 41. We're making headway today.
Yeah.
We're plowing through it. Genesis 41. Mary, if you wouldn't mind. Let's see here, we're gonna get Pharaoh's dream. If you wouldn't mind reading to
Through 25.
through 25, and then that may be a good place to start.
After 2 whole years, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing by the Nile, and there came up out of the Nile 7 sleek and fat cows, and they grazed in the reed grass. Then 7 other cows, ugly and thin, came up out of the Nile after them and stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile. The ugly and thin cows ate up the 7 sleek and fat cows, and Pharaoh awoke. Then he fell asleep and dreamed a second time. 7 ears of grain, plump and good, were growing on one stalk. And 7 ears thin and blighted by the east wind sprouted after them. The thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump and full ears. Pharaoh awoke. It was a dream. In the morning, his spirit was troubled, so he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was no one who could interpret them to Pharaoh. Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, I remember my faults today. Once Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me and the chief baker in custody in the house of the captain of the guard. We dreamed on the same night, he and I, each having a dream with its own meaning. A young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. When he told him, he interpreted our dreams to us, giving an interpretation to each according to his dream. As he interpreted to us, so it turned out. I was restored to my office, and the baker was hanged. Then Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was hurriedly brought out of the dungeon. When he had shaved himself and changed his clothes, he came in before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. I've heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Joseph answered Pharaoh, it is not I. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer.
That's a good place to stop really quick. It's something that you could almost pass over very quickly in this telling of this story. Joseph had to shave himself before he came before Pharaoh. In anthropological study and things of that nature, we know that hair was deemed untrustworthy or ungodly within Egyptian culture. So before he came before Pharaoh, imagine the dichotomy of a Hebrew, and we know they're penchant for growing beards and things of that nature as a part of their culture. He needed to shave fully all hair from his body before he could come before Pharaoh. So this is there's almost something there of this cultural exchange that's taking place, that Joseph is inculcating himself into the house of Egypt in a way. Now that's teasing up what's to come. We know later on that the house of Egypt and the Hebrew people, there'll be some challenges there, to say the least, and there's going to be a separation there as well. And so when we're looking at this in the framework of what's the author trying to say to its intended audience, we have to note these little pieces of culture that are there, almost as guide markers for what makes us culturally different. So,
We still have some division.
Yeah, another marker here, I guess, is the apparent importance of dreams at this time. People were apparently focused on dreams and that somehow they could foretell events.
yeah,
And I don't know to what extent that was common in other cultures in the Mediterranean at the time, but ever so often, that kind of an idea is resurrected, like in Freud, for example, later on.
Except here, the dreams were from God.
yeah,
I mean, it was a spiritual event.
yeah. I mean, it's also, clear to me that if anything, these things are taking place in a manner that very clearly gives Joseph the opportunity to show the power of God, right? Had the cupbearer came back and said, hey, I had this dream, the other guy had this dream, and these things happened or whatever, Pharaoh, that probably would have went right over Pharaoh's head. In the context of Pharaoh having this disturbing dream, these cows consuming one another, and the health of he knows that something is going wrong within his kingdom. Is the feeling that he has, and having this very arresting and disturbing dream. How do I make sure that what I saw does not actually happen to my people? He's got to find someone who can give him the interpretation, and then it comes home to the cupbearer to bring that young man out of captivity. It's almost, the timing of it is lovely and striking.
Plot device.
Yeah,
Mhm, yeah.
but it does show that this sort of thing, these dreams and interpretations, are almost commonplace in the sense that he's called magicians and all these other people who interpret to interpret his dreams, the Pharaoh has. And so it says to me, there's tons of people out there who do this.
Yeah,
But
and he found them all inadequate.
Yeah.
Which is a comment on magic and on
Yes.
non-monotheistic wisdom.
Yeah, good point.
I mean, this is common to this day within cultures. I was over a good friend's house. This older lady, she had owned a jewelry store. I knew her because she would come in and have coffee at this coffee shop I worked in back when I was a very young man. But it had come years later that I'm getting married and I need a ring. And I wanted to find a diamond that wasn't a part of any conflicts or anything like that. And she was like, I know a perfect diamond for you. My family. So she takes this diamond from a ring that she has, and she's going to reset it for my wife, and that became my engagement ring.
Wow.
But anyway, I'm over our house having dinner, and we have coffee. In the style that we would call Turkish coffee, but remember, this lady is Armenian, so she's very keen that this is Armenian coffee.
Yeah.
And we have coffee, and she invites me, turn your coffee cup over when you're done. All right.
Oh,
And then-
he's gonna read the
And then
grounds.
I'm going to read the grounds of your coffee cup. And let me tell you, spot on. There's no human way that she could have known what she was telling me. No human way possible. And it was spot on. The fortune that she read from that cup could not have been more aptly timed, more right in every way. And I'm touched that she is a Christian, but she, in her cultural tradition, that was something that you do, especially when you have a guest. And I can't, there's no earthly way that I can explain how she got the fortune that she got from
It's a
looking
gift.
at the grains of this cup.
It's a gift.
Yeah, yeah,
And probably not everybody has it.
no.
But it is accepted and
Yes.
in like the Orthodox churches. I know some women who were Bulgarians, immigrants, and one woman would sit in the lobby of the church after services and do exactly that, read tea leaves. for
Wow.
people. Just read, I don't know what exact tea it was, pardon. Definitely, probably not. Bulgarian, probably not, but, you know, that's a part of that culture,
Yeah,
and she did that, and she made a lot of spending money that way. People then gave her money.
Yeah.
For it, and it's a part of their culture.
yeah.
I must tell you, I'll never poo-poo that notion ever again, having had that experience.
Yeah.
That was gobsmacking, like just
Wow.
unbelievable. I mean, my entire family history, tons of random things about, individual people in my family that she had never met. There's no way for her to know, no way whatsoever, other than something truly spiritual and divine. And yeah.
And we can't dissuade you from that.
I must tell you, there are things in this world that I don't understand. And that is certainly one of them. But at any rate, in that world, in that same vein, Joseph is speaking the truth, and an effective and affecting truth.
And that's a part of some of the church that the Latin church made a concerted effort to get rid of
Oh,
at some point in history.
Yeah.
After 300, I mean, people would be slaughtered for doing that. And it really became like the black magic then.
yeah.
And as they went up through Europe, they talked about trees and witches and
Mhm.
kept that. If you get in touch with natural gods and goddesses, that you were to be burned to death. And in the Eastern Church, that is still alive. They kept this idea that the Holy Spirit is there for you. The only difference was that the Reformation did give people the right, or did recognize that you can be in touch with the Holy Spirit on your own.
Yeah.
It just was not, it was all through the priests. In
Yes.
the in the Latin church for, 1500 years.
Did the Irish have that gift of?
Oh, I have no doubt.
Well, that's Blarney. But I'm talking about somebody
I
other than-
saw the stone and it is Blarney.
Yeah.
Larry is very, very specific, and it actually
Yeah.
isn't mystical at all. It's
No, it
manipulative.
isn't. No, but I'm talking about
Larry is
something
when
else.
you jive. There's jive talk, when the man,
You're
is-
just
yeah.
malarkey.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, but they did, the Celts had a strong relationship with the sea, and there were
Oh, yeah.
fairies all over the place. When
Yeah.
I was a student in Ireland, and there was some damage done to a wall, well, you might as well not fix it, because that's a leprechaun path.
Oh,
I mean, you don't know
Yeah.
what to believe, they believe.
yeah, okay. Didn't mean to digress to
Oh,
that
no,
extent,
no.
sorry. but-
No.
Al,
Yes, Rosemary.
I'm thinking, this carried over because as I remember it, unless I'm thinking wrong, Sigma notwithstanding, didn't another Joseph have a dream and bring his entire family away from where he was to Egypt?
Yeah, wait, we're gonna get there. We're gonna get there. This is, you're a little bit ahead of us, but we're going.
Okay.
All of this to say, no, Joseph is not considered a priest. He is not necessarily, he's a person of faith, but he's not somebody of any nobility within regards to the patrilineal society that he's a part of. He's the youngest, almost the youngest. He's almost a middle child, because there was one more child after him.
Oh,
But he's one of the younger of the many children of Israel.
Yeah.
right? There's nothing noble in his story at all, yet he still has access to the power of God. He still has God's favor. God's presence is still upon him, blessing the work that he does, whether that work be in the field or that work be, some hoity-toity thing in some hoity-toity household. God is with him no matter what. There's a whole lot there for everyone to identify with and to see. And there's something of the nature and character of how God feels about his people that's being revealed in the life of Joseph. And that's why the story is here. We should continue forward here. I think we left off at 13 or so. Let's see here. Eric, do you mind reading for a little bit? Let's go verse 14 until let's go 14.
Did we just read that?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're down
Yeah.
to 25.
We're down to 25.
Yes.
Oh, well.
Yeah,
You're
because
right
of
about
the
it.
magicians, there was no one who could explain
All
it.
right, so let's go
Yeah.
25. Thank you. Yeah, I think
Is it being repeated?
it's being repeated. So,
Oh.
Okay,
But the last line is important. But when I told it to the magicians, there was no one who could explain it to me.
so let's say 14 again,
Okay,
and I will chime in when it's a good place to stop, because I don't really see it straight off. I'm sorry about that.
okay, so you just shut me up when I get to
I will,
that.
I'll rush in.
Okay. So Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. When he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream, and no one can interpret it. But I had heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. If I cannot do it, Joseph replied to Pharaoh, but God will give me, I cannot do it, Joseph replied to Pharaoh, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, in my dream, I was standing on the bank of the Nile. When out of the river, they came up 7 cows, fat and sleek, and they grazed among the reeds. After them, 7 other cows came up, scrawny and very ugly and lean. I had never seen such ugly cows in all the land of Egypt. The lean, ugly cows ate up the 7 fat cows that came up first. But even after they ate them, no one could tell that they had done so. So they looked just as ugly as before. Then I woke up. In my dreams, I also saw 7 heads of grain, full and good, growing on a single stalk. After them, 7 other heads sprouted, withered and thin and scorched by the east wind. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 good heads. I told this to the magicians, but none could explain it to me. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads of grain are 7 years. It is one and the same dream. The 7 lean, ugly cows that came up afterward are 7 years, and so are the 7 worthless heads of grain scorched by the east wind. They were 7 years of famine. It is just as I said to Pharaoh, God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout the land of Egypt, but 7 years of famine will follow them. Then all the abundance in Egypt will be forgotten, and the famine will ravage the land. The abundance in the land will not be remembered, because a famine that follows it will be so severe. The reason the dream was given to Pharaoh in 2 forms is that the matter has been firmly decided by God, and God will do it soon. And now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners of the land to take 1/5 of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. They should collect all the food of these good years that are coming and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh to be kept in the cities for food. This food should be held in reserve for the country to be used during the 7 years of famine that will come upon Egypt, so that the country may not be ruined by the famine.
You
The
go,
plan,
Eric.
okay,
Eric, that's a good place to start. So, very clear what's happening here.
Yeah.
That God has revealed that famine is coming. I would like to note that Joseph, you know, shrewdly, I will definitely give it some arc here. He shrewdly says, let Pharaoh appoint somebody who's in charge of it to follow this plan that I'm going to give you right here, right?
Done all the time.
You know, gave him, put in a good application for himself right there on the spot.
Yeah,
Uh,
oh, yeah.
That's what consultants do every day.
Exactly.
And I brought my resume right here.
Funny you should know about that.
I did it once myself.
So excellent work on Joseph's part of getting himself out of the dungeon. We know where this story is going. But what if this business of God having decided it? You know, the reason the dream was told to you twice was a way of letting God let you know that it was decided.
This idea, I mean, he's quoting God. But no, Pharaoh didn't believe in the same God that Joseph did.
Right.
And so you never, it's interesting that you never hear how Pharaoh sensed all that, really.
It's a polytheistic society, and if memory serves me correct, Pharaoh believed that the God of the Hebrews is a God, not the God. So you know, I'm sure Pharaoh took to heart this young man, this monotheist coming in and saying like, "Hey, my God has decided this." You know,
Because he believed in multiple gods.
yeah, exactly.
Exactly. Didn't threaten his gods.
So,
What significance did 7 have in that society?
it's a number of completion. You know, so you know, it's almost as to say that you know, this is sure. It's putting the certainty behind it. That surely there will be 7 complete, full, abundant years, and there will be 7 completely and fully, you know, depraved years as well.
Well, there were also 7 cows and 7 this. So I was
Mhm.
just wondering if in that society, 7 stood for
Perfection, completion.
So that was the
Mhm.
10 of those days.
There you go. Yeah.
In a manner of speaking.
Mm.
But it's
Shelley. Oh, you raised your hand.
So I'm trying to do, I was trying to do a little math here. So if it's at 1/5 for 7 years, that gets you to about 1.4 years, but they've survived over 7 years, 0.2, 1/5. So it's basically they've set aside 1.2 plentiful years to cover 7 fallow years.
Mhm.
Is my math wrong on that? It doesn't seem like it's going to be enough, is what I'm going to say.
No,
Well, it might
But maybe
still
my
have been-
math is,
No, your math, I think, is correct. You've got the numbers right. But you just have to, I guess, in those lean years, you're going to have to be a little lean. It won't be as plentiful as the first
Stretch.
I'd also like to note that like the dichotomy that's there, that there's in the dream, the cows get consumed and the grain gets consumed, right?
Yeah.
Now,
yeah.
which one of those elements are being consumed and how, we're uncertain. We know that they operate together, right? I mean, Inez, I may not be a farmer, but I know you need some grain to feed the cows, right? You need grain to feed your livestock, and you need, and the livestock fertilize the ground. So there's something, all inclusive here that's going to work. And so I think, Shelley, at a certain level, setting aside that grain may have served to help feed the livestock. Setting aside that grain may have served to give people rations that would get them through while they also are consuming animals and other things. And so, I think there's something to it. I'm not sure about the plan, but clearly God had a plan and revealed it to Joseph.
They're still rational.
The ugly cow.
Yes.
Yeah. But perhaps it was perfect for trading. Perhaps, it doesn't really let us know Where we'll get to it. Scripture doesn't really reveal to us how they survived, but they're thankful that they did make some sort of provision.
Yeah.
Um,
Heated.
Isn't it also very important though that the main staple was grain for their bread on a daily basis?
mhm.
Yeah,
So the value of the grain.
Yeah.
And the need for it is a constant.
Yeah,
yeah,
It's not like they have a substitution. for it.
yeah.
And also probably in a society that grain, everyone ate grain, but just like today, meat is not everybody's, so if you were talking about cows, not everybody got to eat meat.
yeah.
Everybody
but
needed
cheese-
to have their
the
grain,
grain
so
was-
that
But
affected
the-
everyone.
And the dairy would have been used. More than,
Yeah.
more than just meat cows.
I mean, you flash forward in the story and you've got Moses out in the wilderness with the Hebrew people. And what are they all calling for? Grain.
Grain.
They're
Yeah,
all
And it's-
calling for
it's the
grain.
mainstay of their
Manna.
life.
Yeah.
And
it
so
is.
God provides bread from heaven. Right.
Yeah.
the manna, yeah.
Yeah, but, you know,
I think that's why it's inclusive in the Lord's Prayer.
yeah, oh, yeah, definitely.
Oh, yeah. I've always
Ah.
thought so.
Definitely.
Some people
It-
Yeah.
disagree, but I've always thought that.
Yeah. Hmm. All right, let's continue here. Where did we leave off?
We're starting now
We're at
with Joseph's
37.
rise to power.
Joseph's rise to power.
Yeah.
Now, how, if you wouldn't mind, let's read about how Joseph rose to some power here. Let's go for a little bit. Let's read from 37 to 50. That may be a good place to stop, or should we stop here and then pick up next week? That is the question. How are you guys feeling? Do you feel like you want to read on a little bit, or should we give this a break until next week?
I'll need to leave at 11:30.
You're leaving 11:30? All right.
I think we can read it in 5 minutes.
Yeah, we can read a little bit in 5 minutes and then discuss. So
You're looking at me?
yes,
Oh.
37 to
Yes, I'm happy to.
49, to the end of 49.
Okay. The proposal pleased Pharaoh and all his servants. Pharaoh said to his servants, "Can we find anyone else like this, one in whom is the Spirit of God?" So Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has shown you all this, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. Only with regard to the throne will I be greater than you." Get that set up. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, "See, I have set you over all the land of Egypt." Removing his signet ring from his hand, Pharaoh put it on Joseph's hand. He arrayed him in garments of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. He had him ride in the chariot of his second in command, and they cried out in front of him, "Bow the knee." Thus he set him over all the land of Egypt. Moreover, Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I am Pharaoh, and without your consent, no one shall lift up hand or foot in all the land of Egypt." Pharaoh gave Joseph the name Zaphenath Paneah, I think, and he gave him Asenath, daughter of Potipharah, priest of On, as his wife. Thus Joseph gained authority over the land of Egypt. Joseph was 30 years old, and when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went through all the land of Egypt. During the 7 plenteous years, the earth produced abundantly. He gathered up all the food of the 7 years when there was a plenty in the land of Egypt, and stored up food in the cities. He stored up in every city the food from the fields around it. So Joseph stored up grain in such abundance, like the sand of the sea, that he stopped measuring it. It was beyond measure.
There we go.
Wow.
So
Yeah,
he did according to God's plan. And I mean, this is an absolute cinematic life that Joseph is living. I mean,
interesting that you say that, because as I was reading this, I thought, who is it that played that role in the movies? I can picture him. Wasn't he bald? I can't remember if he was bald or not, but he was.
Could it have been Carlton Heston?
Could have been.
Was it
Yeah.
I
Jewel?
don't think Charlton Heston was in.
Did anyone ever do, has there been a Joseph movie?
Yes, yes.
There's been a Joseph cartoon movie, I know.
Yeah.
But I
What are
can't
many
think of
colors?
yeah, I can't, there's been a Broadway show, right? But I can't think of,
Unless it was in like one of the other movies that were the ones I see at Easter.
Wasn't the
Joseph,
Osmond guy-
well, wasn't it Joseph, the coat of many colors? Wasn't that a?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Broadway
Yeah.
musical.
Broadway
That
musical.
was,
Oh, that was a Broadway musical.
The children's
Okay.
book.
Donny Osmond was one of, he played the role during
Oh.
part of that run.
Yeah.
Because my daughter just loved Donny.
Oh.
I thought it was you.
Not so much.
But it's funny the things you remember.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, the linkages.
He
Yeah.
sang the best song in a Disney movie, Mulan. Donny Osmond's still doing it. He's still got it.
Yeah.
That being said, this is an absolutely and utterly amazing life.
Yes.
Not without pain, not without strife. It's not really letting on. I think,
Charmed, right? It's a charm.
yeah, I think Joseph is what, 13 or so, 12 or 13 when he is sold into slavery.
I had to think about that because when they said 30, I thought,
Mhm.
you know, wait a minute, how many years has it been?
He spent quite a few years in captivity.
Yeah, Yeah.
Essentially. You know, we're not sure just how many years he was in Potiphar's home, but it's very clear that he spent a long time in prison.
yeah.
You know, and so there's a whole lot there. Like I said, having done prison ministry, this is one of those stories that we go to. You know that you know there's no guarantee in life that it's all going to turn out necessarily rosy every step of the way.
Yeah.
There's going to be some setbacks. There's going to be some struggles. Some of you are in here because, you know, for the wrong reasons. You know, some of you are in here for the right reasons. but God is with you nonetheless.
Yeah.
And so, you know, there's a lot there. There's a lot there. I feel like we can all identify with it. You know,
Yeah.
I definitely, you know, no one gets what they deserve. You know, no one necessarily gets what they deserve. You know, but we get a little bit of everything on the way.
Yeah,
And you know, it's important to realize what we're really here for, and you know who we're really here to serve. And I think that Joseph's life, if anything, is an example of somebody who has those priorities straight. When Pharaoh sends for him, he says, hey, you know, I don't have any personal gifts here. This is to God's glory. And being willing to take those steps back and keep it all in the right perspective is something I don't know if I would necessarily be able to do having spent 10 years in prison, right? I would just be happy to be out, and, you know, hey, yeah, attribute it to me, give me something, right?
Especially at a young age, he hasn't spent all that time feeling woe is me, I'm sorry, plotting revenge.
Right,
Mhm.
exactly.
Yeah.
He hasn't,
That's a big part of the story.
you notice that a lot.
Good point.
yeah,
Also, I see it as that he completely surrendered to God,
Mhm.
Mhm.
which is not easy
Mhm.
Right,
for one to do, but yet he did it by 30. That's pretty good.
well, earlier than that,
True,
yeah,
true.
yeah.
Well, we read today, but the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love. That's what so many times the message is to us, that we go through bad things, sad things, but God is with us and shows us steadfast love.
Mhm.
And we're encouraged to have faith in that. That I'm never alone in this mess.
Do you remember that picture of God carrying the person? You know,
Oh,
where was God or something like that?
the footprints in the
The
sand.
footprints in the sand. Yeah, yeah, that's when God
That was a
carrying
revelation
him.
that when people heard that, sometimes I think in
I tell you, when I went
it was a
through
whole
cancer
different
that
concept.
first time, I knew he was with me the whole way.
Yeah.
I, you know, I knew I was being carried.
I mean, sometimes we don't have that perspective, you know? Sometimes we don't, you know, there was a point where my wife and I, just a few weeks ago, our daughter was doing something that, as she is wont to do, that was
Yes.
noisy and busy and messy and wild, and we're like, how are we gonna do this?
Yeah,
How are we gonna get this human being with this personality
yeah.
into adulthood
Yeah.
as a
Same.
healthy adult? And it was in that moment that my wife realized that we're not gonna do this at all. God's gonna have to do this. God is gonna have to do this, and he is in their infinite wisdom chose for us to be a part of her life along her journey. But God is gonna do this work, and you know, we're gonna, you know, do our healthy bit of yelling and correcting and loving and hugging along the way.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I think that that's the truth of all of this, that you know, God attends our way every step.
Yeah.
Every step. Let's pray. Let's pray.